It's a pleasure to be with you, and as the speakers have said already this morning, the importance of transport, the importance of roads and bridges cannot be overstated. And in this world today, I have to tell you that it works. I arrived at 5:30 this morning, and here I am with you speaking. I want to shift gears here for a moment to change the perspective, because the arguments that have been presented already this morning seem like very obvious things to us. Most of us are engineers, and if you get the facts right, the conclusions should be self-evident. So how come we're not getting the funding? This is a worthy enterprise that we're about: moving people, moving goods, building infrastructure, operating the infrastructure for the good of our people. So in principle, it shouldn't be a problem. So what is the challenge? In principle, when you think about maintenance and preservation, they're generally acknowledged as good and necessary. And they're generally assumed that it's happening, and in most cases, it's invisible to the public. They just expect it to work. So for better or for worse, we are taken for granted. This is the basic theory and principles of pavement preservation. This chart here should not be new to you. It is understood, it's illustrated in this diagram. So what is the problem? The problem is that not only are there other challenges, as the speakers have talked about this morning, that compete with funding, but even within our own industry, when you look at major projects, things like the major bridges that we build on the left-hand side here, as opposed to crack sealing, what's more appealing? So we have a huge challenge, because even though preservation, as we say in the United States, it's motherhood and apple pie, yet it competes in a very, very unfair, unlevel playing field, because what appeals to the public are these big, imagination-grabbing projects, not the day-to-day preservation activities. And again, it's been mentioned, and these should not be news to you. These are possible messages that are very solid messages about why preservation is important. It is the most cost-effective means of keeping the pavements in good condition. We need to maximize the investment that we've made in the pavements in this country, in this world. And it is essential part, an important part of a good asset management ethic. And when you think about that curve, about extending the service life, it can actually minimize the reconstruction frequency and the impacts on traffic that work zones have. And when you think about preservation activities, there are smaller energy and environment impact. And then there are other messages that you will hear about during the course of the summit. But the question is, which message? When we're talking about communicating the value of preservation, what message should we use? I would submit to you that it requires a reframing of the message, and to think of value differently. Perhaps we can use an example from a parallel sector. When do you choose, when do you decide when to paint a house, repaint a house? Do you repaint a house when you decide that you don't like the color anymore? Do you repaint the house when the paint has become dull and fainted or fading? Do you wait until the paint begins to chip and peel and reveal the underlying wood? Or do you actually wait until the wood is exposed and weathered? Or perhaps to the point where the wood is rotting. At that point, it's too late. You actually have to go in and replace the wood. Or maybe don't worry about it at all. The answer really depends on what you value and what you can afford. So in some ways, we need to reframe what the message is. Spending. We have spent billions and billions and billions of dollars on our infrastructure. And we need to reframe that all that spending has been an investment that needs to be preserved an investment that needs to be optimized and maximized. And we need to recast what not preserving results in. The work zones in every nation causes congestion. In the United States, congestion causes 10 to 15%. Congestion is caused by 10 to 15% of the congestion is caused by work zones. So we recast it and say that preservation activities can actually reduce the number and duration of work zones. And again, as I mentioned earlier, energy consumption, greenhouse gas emissions are less for the preservation activities. So what message? It also requires recasting the message, the means. So firstly, what resonates with your public is a message you need to hammer on. And this is a message that goes not just to the politicians, but to your neighbors, to your colleagues, to the grocer. Recasting it means putting it into terms that the lay person can understand and grasp. Not just understand, but to be able to remember it. 42% is a number. If you don't keep roads in good condition, it costs the average family $324 a year additional in car repair costs. And you just multiply that and you get into the billions. The use of infographics not only gets the information across quickly, but it grabs the attention. So these are some examples that AASTHO has used recently to communicate the need to increase the funding for our infrastructure. So when we think about communicating the value of preservation, we really do need to focus on the value, not just the dollars that we as engineers are used to talking about, but the value that our audience listens to is important too, and casting that message in those terms. So again, we need to accept and work with the larger context that we are actually in competition with other funding needs that are real. And yet we need to have our fair share to make sure that we don't lapse behind to getting to the point where we are in a real crisis. Some people would say we're not really in a real crisis today. Cars still move, trucks still move, but it'll be too late when we get to that point of being in crisis. It'll take 10 years to get out of it. So we need to accept and work with a larger context. We need to gather the facts that matter, and we need to choose the story that resonates with the audience values, and then to tell the story of infographics that are easy to grasp. As you can tell from these slides, I've borrowed a number of pieces of information from other organizations. And that's what this summit here is about, sharing of information, spurring each other to higher creativity so that we can get the job done. So I thank you for your attention. Best wishes for a successful summit here. Thank you.